Here in this session, we will consider the changing utopian attractions in history, in our own past, in our European American past. And we will see that from a vision of rich imagination and dreams of a better world, a utopia of felicity, way to practice this Halloween, which originally, of course, has something to do with All Souls and All Saints. In the Roman Catholic tradition, that's when you go out and pray for the dead on the graves. And then, of course, the dead show up in some form or other. They're present, and so you frighten them with your costumes. Of course, it's also the day when Martin Luther nailed his theses on the door, so it is recorded, in which he distanced himself from the teaching that he had received, which he saw as really perversion of the Christianity that he found in Scripture. And so it was a statement against the fear expressed in this All Saints and All Souls practice, then widespread, to declare that God is in our favor, that the righteousness which God grants to us is a free gift and not the result of good works and good intentions and so forth. There is at least in my German translation of the Bible, in the third chapter of the book of Romans, a word added to it by Luther, and that is, it's the free gift, the gratis gift. It doesn't cost you anything, that Christ has died for us. It costs God something, but not us. Anyway, that was also the 31st of October. But thank you for coming. I'd like tonight to not just continue from where I left off last time, because there's a good number of you that wasn't here last time, so I'd like to overlap it a bit and quickly run through what I said last time and then build on that to add to what I was going to say tonight. Thanks again to Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church and the possibility of coming here for their hospitality and the open door that we were able to enter through. So thank you. These 5 weeks we're going to talk about the basis, the nature, the origin, as it were, and its present manifestation of utopian thought, particularly recognizing that utopianism, as it is seen in the last several hundred years, is often a quite dangerous perspective. Danger in a sense that it distorts reality. It makes it impossible for us to live in a reality that God had made in a certain way, because utopianism appeals to your imagination. It appeals to something that is beyond reality. It appeals because we live in tension between what is and what ought to be, what we experience and what we wish to experience. A tension that initially is supported by Scripture when it says that we live in a world, first of all, that God created unfinished, that He expected us to add things to, and so therefore you have to have good ideas as to what you could add or should add. God did not create a world the way it's recorded in the Quran, that was made and then to be left alone, merely admired, repeated, in your admiration, marveled at, but not changed. The God of the Bible expected Adam and Eve and their descendants to change things that God had made, to diversify, to change them in greater variety, in greater size, in whatever, different tastes, etc. And most centrally, of course, you have the admonition, the mandate to have dominion over God's creation, which does not mean to dominate, but rather to figure out how it works so that you could make use of it, as well as to have another generation of people and therefore to have babies. Thus, there would be more people than God had created to begin with. And these would not be God's creation, but rather these would be the creation of a man and a woman and of their descendants. And thus you have the whole picture of a dynamic reality, of a historic reality, in the sense that history would be very real. Choices would have real consequences. And thus your participation in history would not just be one of gawking at what God had made, but of indeed being a builder, a gardener, a craftsman, the way God, described in Genesis, was a craftsman and saw to it that out of the tohu vabohu, this undefinable something that he had made, distinguished from what was there before, namely nothing outside of God, now there was something, and this something becomes more and more defined as the days go on. Never mind how long they were, I don't think we know. But the point is that it was a changing, dynamic reality, and God expected the creature made in his image, whom he placed into what he had prepared, with mandates to create, that they would continue to create, and so that no day would be a repetition of the previous day. You would not only eat hamburgers, you would vary what you dress yourself with. You know, it's a simple observation to realize that animals don't have a choice. Cat loses its fur in springtime and gains its fur in the fall. And it always is a cat fur. It has no variation. It's built in its program, so to speak, in its instinct. And the human being is totally unlike that. You know, we have so much choice, so many things to imagine, to create, to long for. And so that's one area of that tension between what is and what could be, what ought to be, what I'd like there to be, as an expression of being an image bearer of God. And then on top of that, of course, one of the central things of the good news of the Bible is that God declares what then happened in the fall of Adam and Eve was a real tragedy. It was not meant to happen. God had warned them against it, but now it occurred. They turned against God. In fact, they followed in the tension of what is and what ought to be something that could never be. They imagined and tried to produce something that could never be, namely what Satan promised, and that is you would be like God. And they should have realized, as God told them not to go that way, that they could never be like God. And thus they destroyed themselves by reaping the consequence of that violation, that contradiction to God, stepping outside, as it were, the creation that God had made into a world that didn't exist. And thus death would be the consequence, separation from God on a legal level, the moral guilt, they hide in the bushes, and eventually also the biological death as a tragedy. And so you have in Scripture then that tension between what is and what ought to be. You also have, after the fall, the tension between what now is damaged, tragically flawed, no longer harmonious, full of problems, sweat and tears, frustration and accusation, and eventually war and brother killing brother, Cain and Abel. What you have is also a mandate to work against all the results of the fall, to believe God rather than to despair, to put your hand to the plow rather than to let nature rule your life. In fact, to bring culture to nature and to impose a more livable reality onto what is now a fallen nature. That's why we go to the doctor. That's why in the Middle Ages they built walled cities. That's why we filter water. That's why we do all kinds of things to improve on what is now a damaged world and no longer a full reflection of the image of the Creator, which we had, Adam and Eve had, at the end of creation when God looked at it all and said, behold, it's very good. God does not look at this present world as, behold, it is very good. It isn't just that he doesn't look at us as you're less than perfect. He would have good reason for that. But it's also that it's not acceptable to God that the lamb and the lion can no longer lie down together, or that avalanches crush people's houses, or that bacteria kill people. And therefore we do something against it. We do something on every level, on the scientific level, on the political level, on the economic level, on the level of compassion and caring for each other, because we understand something, and that is that life isn't what it was meant to be. And so how can we diminish the result of the fall in the external world, in our own minds, and in our relationship to others? Now that's the tension we all experience. And as I said last time, maybe just quickly run through that, that's the kind of tension that Homer describes in the Iliad, where a person is insulted, his wife has been stolen, kidnapped, taken off to Troy, and the revenge is planned. Very much what you have, unhappily, as part of European history and what you currently have in a culture such as Libya, where you take revenge. It's not resolved, it's revenge. Or those of you who remember that, in the 90s when Yugoslavia broke up and Milosevic insisted on keeping it together and war broke out, then all of a sudden the Serbs took revenge on the Kosovars, the Albanians, and in the Muslims, because 500 years ago, the Battle of the Amstelveld in Serbia, the Albanians sided with the Turks rather than with the Orthodox Russians. And we now take revenge 500 years later and chop your head off or cut your head off. It's a culture of revenge, etc. So that was what Homer describes in the Iliad, the battle over Troy, and their magnificent scenes of bloody conflict and characters developed marvelously. I believe it's for the first time that you have that really described outside of the Bible, have really described a real human tragedy of human glory, human longing for justice, human beings being caught in their philosophy of embracing death as the only way that you can get glory and make a name for yourself if you die as a hero, rather than if you live, and so forth. And so that's what Homer describes magnificently in the Iliad. And I referred last time to a new translation of the Iliad, and I made a mistake. I didn't give you the right name. It's translated by Stephen Mitchell. It just came out a little while ago. It's a wonderful introduction and translation of the Iliad. Reads like a novel. It's just wonderful. But anyway, what is described here is precisely the chaos of our existence. When you look out, life does not make sense. There are situations that are not explainable on the background of any kind of straightforward cause and effect. There are other things involved in it. And as a Christian, I would say, of course, there are other things involved in it, because fundamentally there is such a thing as the mystery of a human being. I don't know why people do the things they do. Sometimes I have a hint. I may have an indication. They may have expressed themselves in words. They may be in situations which may make it more likely, understandable that they would do that. But fundamentally, I don't know. And what Homer describes in the Iliad is basically the battle of people against people and gods against gods behind the people. And then these gods are against each other as well, and then they're not consistent with themselves. And so it's utter chaos. That is not a way to resolve the tension between what is and what ought to be. And therefore, in the process of philosophy, you find people grappling with things that would explain it perhaps better, and that would lay the foundation for something that would be coherent, accessible, and rational, dare I say. And that's why I proposed the pre-Socratic philosophers who, for one reason or another, began to wonder whether the gods were true and should be relied upon, whether they shouldn't be fought, or whether overall there wasn't something more certain than the play of the gods and the vanity and foolishness of human beings, as well as their